So today we will converse with Tim about his latest book, Italian Life, A Modern Fable of Loyalty and Betrayal, and about his work in general. There will be time for a Q&A afterwards, so feel free to write questions in the chat, and then we will discuss it at the end. Let me also change the speaker view. Okay. So before turning to our conversation with Tim and really looking into the book, I would like to introduce him to everyone. Born in Manchester in 1954, Tim Parks grew up in London and studied at Cambridge and Harvard. In 1981, he moved to Italy, where he has lived ever since, raising a family of 3 children. He has written 18 novels, including Europa, shortlisted for the Booker Prize, Destiny, Cleaver, Sex is Forbidden, and most recently in Extremis, all of them published in 6 countries. During the 90s, he wrote 2 personal nonfiction accounts of life in northern Italy, Italian Neighbours and An Italian Education, books that won acclaim and popularity for their anthropological wryness. These were complemented in 2002 by A Season with Verona, a grand overview of Italian life as seen through the business and passion of football, and Italian ways on and off the rails from Milan to Palermo. Other nonfiction works include a history of the Medici Bank in 15th century Florence, Medici Money, a memoir on health, illness, and meditation, Teach Us to Sit Still, and more recently, Out of My Head, On the Trail of Consciousness, an unclassifiable book that mixes essay and memoir in a reflection on the nature and location of consciousness. In 2020, he published Italian Life, which Tim will present today. A regular contributor to the New York Review of Books and the London Review of Books, his many essays are collected in Helen Back, The Fighter, A Literary Tour of Italy, and Life and Work. Over the last 5 years, he has been publishing a series of blogs on writing, reading, translation, and the like in the New York Review online. These have recently been collected in Where I'm Reading From and Pen in Hand. For many years, he ran a postgraduate course in translation at UChicago University, Milan, and is author of Translating Style, A Literary Approach to Translation, A Translation Approach to Literature. This book, which analyzes Italian translations of the English modernist, is considered a classic in its field. Aside from his own writing, Tim has translated works by Moravia, Calvino, Tabucchi, Calasso, Machiavelli, and Leopardi. In January, Penguin Book published his translation of Cesare Pavese masterpiece, The Moon and the Bonfires, almost 20 years after the last translation. Tim is actually about to receive his Italian citizenship, so hopefully by summer 2021, he will be Italian after 40 years. And if you let me, before Tim takes the floor, I would also like to add that a brief personal note. Tim and I actually met in fall 2010 in an anonymous classroom at UChicago University in Milan. And during my 2-year laurea magistrale in specialized translation, Tim made me discover the wildly interesting world of translation. And despite taking a different academic and professional path, his teachings never ceased to resound in my mind and really truly changed the way I've been approaching written text ever since. And reading his book 10 years after that experience has really been a sort of trip down memory lane for me, but also an incredible reality check of the status of Italian academia and its politics. And I can't really recommend it enough. So Tim, the floor is yours for Italian Life.
The screen is mine.
The screen is yours.
The screen is mine. Okay. In this miserable format, let me try and say something intelligent about this book. It has a dreadfully ambitious title, Italian Life, which wasn't my choice. Although my choice was perhaps even more extravagant. I wanted to call it Italian Universe. You will see why as we go on. But and then it has this subtitle, A Modern Fable of Loyalty and Betrayal. So what is this about? Sara's told you of my 40 years here. it sounds like the years in the wilderness or something, obviously not. And over those years, and at certain intervals, I've tried to say something about that very strange business of feeling that you are in a different society. Like we all know that feeling that you get even as a child when you go to visit another family and you sit at the table of another family and you realize that other families are not the same as yours and that there's a different feeling and a different dynamic and that kind of different things happen and different things get said in different conversations. And you find it very hard to put your finger on what that is. And on a larger scale, of course, we get that when we go to different countries. We know that there's a different feel to being in Germany from being in the UK. And it's very difficult to say what that is. Obviously, we have that chimera national character, but unfortunately, that usually gets reduced to sort of a series of stereotypes or imagined figures. So over the years, I've tried one way or another to say something about this. And in all the events, all the attempts before this, I always tried in a kind of memoir form. That is, one presents the slightly ingenuous outsider and his encounters with different areas of Italian life, whether it be one's neighbors in a condominium or children at school, or, oh, I'm now very big, okay. And in doing that, you know, one can obviously have a lot of fun, and it's easy for the reader to identify with the narrator. But there are obvious limits to approaching. An account of a different country in this way, and also, after all these years in Italy, I really felt I'd earned the right to put some Italian characters right in there, as it were. And so Italian life is very much a hybrid of memoir and novel, and tries to offer the pleasures of both without falling between two stools. There was another reason for doing this, and that was because there was just one area of Italian life that I really know pretty well, which is the university, where I worked for more than 30 years. Now, obviously, while you're working in a university, you don't want to write about it. I mean, unless you're going to be praising it, and that will be true, I think, probably anywhere in the world, but even more true in Italy. And then one of the interesting things about the university is that it's a place where there's a very strong tension between values that I think are often in tension in Italy. In a university, it would appear that the main criteria for being there, whether as a teacher or as a student, is competence. The teacher is there because he's super competent, and he teaches that competence to the student, who is rewarded insofar as he or she is competent. But we all know that universities are also closed communities where people build up power, areas of power, areas of control, and in those areas of power and control, loyalty and a sense of clan might be more important than competence. So it was interesting thinking about the university as a kind of microcosm for various issues which dog Italian life, as it were. Issues to do with belonging to a group or not, being inside or outside a group or not, and then what is the criteria for being a worthy member of that group? Is it really competence, or is it loyalty, and so on? So the idea was, tell a lot of stories, just tell an awful lot of stories about about how things work, but also about how 3 or 4 characters engage. Because another wonderful thing about the university is that it's a meeting of young people and old people. Older people, okay, well, old now. And the younger people in general have been fed a particular public narrative about values in Italian society, a narrative which again is very much to do with meritocracy and competence. And at the university, they will live in that part of the university, hopefully, where those values prevail. But should they ever get a chance to lift the screen and see on the other side where the professors are operating, they will become aware that perhaps those values are not dominant. And the other thing is that the student is being prepared to move out into a world where that competence is only really of relative value, depending obviously on the kind of thing you're studying. If you're studying engineering, a certain genuine level of competence might be absolutely essential. But if you're studying, I don't know, English literature, that might not be the case. So it was fun to set this up. I brought in my characters. I was very eager to have a Southern character in the book. I'm married to someone from Puglia, so that was something I wanted to do, and I was always fascinated at the university by the difference between the Southern students in Milan who were obliged to live away from home and had a very strong feeling of loyalty towards home often, but also maybe a rejection of home as a possible place to live. So they are also people who face an issue of belonging. They belong in a place which perhaps isn't able to offer them what the North can offer. And they often see the North as a place where meritocracy is more dominant than in the South. Whether rightly or wrongly, I don't want to go into that, but they often feel like that. So these are an interesting group of people. They often feel perhaps that they have somewhat betrayed the South by moving away from it. So at the center of this book, there is a young woman from Basilicata, the first in her family ever to go to university, who's come up to Milan. So we have an outsider, as it were, trying to come inside. And then the other outsider in the book, who obviously gives a chance for me to express a lot of my experiences, is a guy whose career track, an English guy whose career track very much follows mine. Again, you've got a slightly older person, again, an outsider trying to move in, but an outsider with a different cultural baggage and perhaps not entirely aware of what the rules are. So that's how the book's set up. And these two people very gradually come together. And in the second half of the book, around their meeting, which is not a love meeting at all, a plot will develop which gets pretty dense and pretty exciting. Let me say that some people on reading it may be somewhat astonished by some of the events. They may feel some of the events in the second half of the book are extreme. But even in the first half of the book, we have a police investigation. But I can say that although I've done everything to, as it were, avoid identity checks, there is nothing in this book that hasn't happened in the last 10 years in Italy, on the most excellent authority. So along with these narratives, what I tried to do, I mean, it was an ambitious book. As you get older, you just feel, well, let's try and do something different. Let's throw a different bag of tools at this game. And so one of the things I did here for fun was to throw in a lot of fables and a lot of Italian stories, a lot of Italian novels or little mini biographies. And of course, to a degree, that fits in with the whole business of having a university situation. I mean, in a university situation where people are studying literature, they're talking about books and books are coming up. But I also wanted to put in the some of the fables of Basile, fables written in the early 17th century, which it seemed to me offer a series of narratives about the nature of Italian life, which, as it were, would just echo and reflect and just invite people to say, so is there a continuity or not between the stories I'm telling, which I'm telling confidently because I know they happened, and these stories from the past. So that was the game, really. And you know, when you write a book, you usually see after about 50, 60 pages whether the game is going to work or not. Sometimes it seems you have to work terribly, terribly hard for an idea to start happening. But at other times you just say, wait a minute, this is actually, you know, going very well. Surprisingly, this is working. And this was one of the happier occasions when it seemed to me that things were working well. So I'm gonna give you a couple of very, very short readings, just so you get an idea of who we're talking about, and then maybe Sara can try and get me to say some more in some useful way. So let me introduce Valeria then. At the moment when she's decided to go to university in her small town, from her small town in Basilicata, she's going to go to Milan, and her anxious mother decides to take her to the local priest, who is a priest attached to Comunione e Liberazione, which is a movement in the church which has been very involved with the universities. And this priest is known to help local students who go north to find accommodation, because, you know, it's terribly worrying to send a daughter to Milan. So Carmela, the mother, takes Valeria to the priest. Again, you know, one of the, I probably said it often enough, but I've made nothing up in this book. Some of it's secondhand, obviously, in this case, but I've made nothing up. So here we are. We're in the Canonica. So yes, Don Gabriele is saying, and he has pulled out a file, and he is leafing through what appear to be a number of handwritten forms. Yes, it would be possible to arrange for Valeria to share a flat in Milan with other students from the community who have gone north. And that way they will all have something in common and keep each other company, and they won't forget their homes and families. Carmela, the mother, is enthusiastic, and she's already thanking Don Gabriele warmly. But now he frowns. I'll be frank, though. He turns to Valeria. We can only do this for committed community members. You understand? Meaning Comunione e Liberazione. You can't accept a precious place in a flat in Milan, which is not an easy city for accommodation, and then just abandon us the way you have done this last year or so. It's been a while since we've seen you, Valeria, hasn't it? There is a silence around the table. Outside in the piazza, people are calling to each other as they set up their stalls for Santa Rita. There will be a procession with the saint's statue and lots of food. Of course, Carmela says, turning to her daughter with an expectant smile. That's only natural, isn't it, Vale? Valeria feels slightly dazed. She is not quite sure why she stopped coming to Mass and to the organization's many meetings for young people. She used to enjoy them, particularly the preschool Masses in May, the Madonna's month. She liked the early morning quiet and the incense and the reassuring atmosphere of devotion in the big church. Perhaps it was boyfriends that took her away, or just not having enough time for all the other things she had taken on, volleyball, piano lessons. The conversation is on pause. Valeria is expected to signal her obedience, her return to the fold. No doubt a word or two will be enough, but so far she hasn't responded. The priest is a smooth operator and turns his affable attention to the mother. He talks about the community's sense of mission. They're presently building their own university right here in town. But of course, she must be aware of that. Did you hear that Fabio, a companion of Valeria's, was accepted at the medical school in Rome? He has made a big contribution to the community activities. Later, after long discussion with her mother, who is confused and upset, "Sarai sola come un cane," she says, lonely as a dog. Valeria thinks that if only Don Gabriele had talked about belief, if he had mentioned prayer and charity, some caritativa she might do, if he had invited her to think of what was being offered as something more and deeper than a convenient exchange, she might have been able to say yes. So Valeria gets, to her surprise, faced with one of those decisions where to get something, you have to do something in return, and makes a fatal decision that she will continue to make throughout her life of wishing to be independent. Totally fatal in a university environment. Let me switch to, and again, these are little introductory moments with no particular pretensions, but it did seem to me, listening to other people's experiences and then comparing them with my own, that it wasn't difficult to simply tell little stories and to hope that telling those stories, one will begin to get a sense of a particular cocktail of possibilities and emotions would develop, because I think emotional life is very different in Italy, and emotions attached to different values around these narrative issues. So let's turn to James. Here he is in some provincial place. We won't give it a name because otherwise I'll be in court. He has managed to make the key contact who will enable him to get seriously into the university world and to do a concorso. But in order to do this concorso, he needs equipalenza of his degree. Equipalenza is a document that sort of gives you an equivalent Italian degree to the degrees you already have abroad. James has a degree from Oxford and from Yale, but these are not recognized, weren't recognized at the time. And in order to have his piece of paper, he has to get endless documents from Yale, from Oxford, even from his school days, to say all the things he studied. And then these have to be presented at a faculty meeting where the local faculty at the university have to say, yes, this is equivalent to a degree from our university. Now, this has been set up by the woman who is protecting him. And James is very happy. It's about to happen. The faculty meeting is now only a week away. He has performed bureaucratic miracles to get hundreds of papers together. He has even forged signatures and changed dates, and everything seems to be about to go as planned. And then, okay, so I'll just read a little bit from here. So all now appears to be well, until 2 days before the famous faculty meeting, the protectress phones James and observes with some consternation that he has not yet been in touch with Professor Lonardi, who has been expecting his call for a month or more. Now, Professor Lonardi is the head of the commission, the head of the faculty. James doesn't understand. Why would he have contacted Lonardi? To what end? The protectress, who as well as being a professor is a smart society lady, laughs, but with a hint of exasperation behind her Torinese accent. Because he's doing you a gentilezza, a kindness. But they're obliged to look at applications, aren't they? It's their job. And all the papers are in order. Her patience runs out. If you want the equipolenza, call Lonardi. Reflecting on this, James realizes that she is telling him, if you want people to help you in general, you have to show that you are an amenable fellow. What it boils down to is he is being asked to make a spectacle of his subservience, to genuflect a little, to kowtow. Still, he makes the call. He needs the equipolenza to give sense and direction to his professional life. After all that effort to get a box full of documents, is he really going to balk at a small hurdle like this? No. Since mobile phones are still in their early days, the number he has given corresponds to a fixed line family phone, and it is the professor's wife who picks up. And when he gives his name, she says, "Ah, yes." The professor comes on the line and is affable. The two have shaken hands on 3 or 4 occasions, but they've never really talked. James is anxious because he doesn't know what Italians say to each other when making calls like this. He wants to say enough to get what he wants and what he feels is due to him, but he doesn't want to say anything he will later feel ashamed of. Vaguely, he wishes he had read Professor Lonardi's recent book, so he could offer some credible compliment to the man. On the other hand, he does not want to become the kind of creep who reads other people's books just to suck up to them. Gently, the professor shows him the way by asking how things are going in Milan, and James says they're going well and he enjoys his teaching there now. And of course, he is taking part in this concorso for a research post and is hoping to win it. There's just the problem of the equipolenza. The professor is silent. James bites the bullet. Of course, I'm terribly grateful to you, Professor, for agreeing to look at my curriculum. It will be a great honor to have a degree from your university. Oh, let's not exaggerate, the professor chuckles complacently. If anything, it will be an honor for us to welcome you as a graduate. So that's done. It wasn't that difficult in the end, was it? Okay, so James, doing perhaps the opposite of Valeria in a certain way. I don't know what you feel, Sara. I thought I might introduce one other character and then we'll chat. What do you think?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I just want to say, the moment these people come together finally is a moment of a commissione di laurea, when the students present their theses. Now, as you probably know, because this is the Italian department all students, or used to, and still most of them do, even for their 3-year first degree, do a thesis and present it in front of a commission, which often has as many as 12 or 14 professors, and perhaps 10 students, present theses in afternoons of simply mind-boggling boredom for everybody. And presentations are made and questions are asked. And then, because one of the very brilliant things about the choreographing of Italian universities is that at this crucial moment of presenting the thesis, the professors then get together, discuss your thesis theoretically, give it a mark, and then add that mark to the average of all the other marks you've taken and pronounce your whole degree mark right there and then in front of a huge public with your families there, so that not only do you do an exam in front of your mum and dad, but you also get your final mark and everything is revealed, and there's sort of huge public orgasm of pleasure and applause and photographing. So it's a sort of an exam and a spectacle at the same time, and also the occasion sometimes, and certainly in my experience far too often, for all kinds of stupid politicking going on behind the scenes, where Professor A doesn't want Professor B's students to get the best marks and vice versa. And so often the students become kind of, unbeknown to themselves, pawns in particular games, and so on and so forth. I will just try to introduce to you at this moment the head of faculty at this university, who is going to be its rector and is going to be the villain of our story, if you want, a charismatic villain, it has to be said. And I present him then at this thesis commission. During the commission, but also at department meetings, the Barone, the great and powerful scholar, almost always a man, will put a positive spin on student-professor relationships, declaring himself the allievo, the pupil, but the word might equally well mean disciple, of this or that maestro, some older and by now quite mythical Barone, a truly, truly great scholar, everyone agrees, retired of course now, and hence beyond envying or competing, or even dead, in which case more fondly admired than ever and more complacently exploited. As my maestro used to say, the Barone will let slip, apropos of almost anything, the distinguished but admirably unassuming Brizzi, he may add, for anyone ignorant enough not to know who his maestro was. When we were together in Rome in the 70s, he goes on, warming to the moment, enjoying the attention everybody's obliged to pay him. Or was it Bologna in the 80s? My alma mater, you know. And then, lowering his voice as though in condescending parenthesis for those too young to be aware, that was when I was editing Testi Millenari. Or that was when we were organizing the memorable conference on Derrida. Or again, that was when I was teaching a module of his renowned course on post-structuralism and socialist semantics, one of the great honors of my early career. And the Barone shakes his head. You've no idea what an astonishing attention to detail Brizzi had. We will not see his like again. But at this point, the great man pauses, for he has forgotten what it was that his maestro used to say, or what he had been planning to say that his maestro used to say. and he purses his lips and frowns, but it hardly matters. The spotlight is on him, and this is always a pleasure. As my renowned maestro used to say, he repeats, and then comes out more or less at random with something quite banal. A buon cavalier non manca lancia. A good knight always has his spear. Or nell'eternità si arriva sempre in tempo. You can't be late for eternity. If his audience have trouble relating this profound reflection to the matter in hand, they don't show it. Or non vi è peggior burla che la vera, the Verona announces. No worse trick than the truth. All these are ordinary proverbs that anyone might attribute at convenient moments to their mothers or grandmothers. And again, it hardly matters. The only important thing is that amid avuncular smiles and a generous air of nostalgia for a nobler past, to which the Verona had the great privilege to belong, everyone understands that he, the Verona, has the power to grant admission or not to this magnificent dynasty, the same way a bishop might claim the right to pass on the sanctity of apostolic succession, but only if he so desires, only if the supplicant is worthy, where worthiness refers, yes, to an extent, to being a good Christian in the bishop's case, or to being a talented academic in the Barone's, but more, far more, to the question of loyalty, absolute loyalty to the Barone or the bishop, who is considering extending a little grace in the miserable supplicant's direction. Loyalty is everything. Everything. Okay, so take a break there, I think.
I'll give you a drink.
Sorry.
So I wanted to ask you if you want to touch some questions, or we should still talk about other topics. There are so many in the book. This is
well. There are a lot of questions here. There's the typical question. You think this kind of politicking doesn't happen in the US and so on.
Yeah. Okay. So
it's kind
one
of
of the
more aggressively that's put as well. You know, I've also been in US universities. Let me take on that issue then. Let me say first of all that this is not a book which seeks to put in comparison different systems or different experiences in one country or another. It's evident that almost any large organization will have lots of elements of politicking in it. I would obviously just invite somebody to read the book to get a flavor of the different nature of that politicking in this society. I think what interests me in Italy is, on the one hand, it still seems to a very large degree that there is an instinct towards a series of values that are based around issues of belonging, a series of values and a series of emotions. And at the same time, there is an awareness that in the modern world, one should look to value structures which are either around issues of competence or issues of moral correctness. And the university is a place where those two things are in quite extraordinary tension. For example, as we know, in Italian universities, most people who make their career stay in the university where they did their doctorate. You know, I remember having this discussion with Sara long ago, and with many other students. So the reason why that happens is that it's very difficult for a student, certainly in arts subjects. You know, there are different areas. It's very difficult for the student to move to another university where he's not known, because every time a job will be up, when jobs are put up, as you know, in Italy, they have this thing called the public concorso, which means that anybody in the whole of the country can apply for the job. It legally has to be presented in a public form, on public gazettes and so on. And then a hugely complicated system has been invented of points for this and that achievement or not, which will presumably make the concorso fair. Unfortunately, as more or less everybody knows, with most concorsi, the concorso will be won by the person in the university for whom this job was always originally intended. And thus the whole creation of this mechanism of apparent clarity is utterly meaningless, except insofar as it then allows for a whole other series of political games to go on between various people. Like, if I do this favor for you of coming on your commission and getting in the person who you want, then you will do the same for me, and then there will be other things going on, and so on and so forth. So there's a constant sense of embarrassment around this issue. Certainly the concorsi, I did 2 concorsi, and in both cases I knew I would win them before I did them. And if I hadn't known I was going to win them before I did them, I wouldn't have done them, because it wouldn't have made any sense to do them. So what's interesting then is not that politicking goes on, but the particular tensions and values around it. Other things that happen in Anglo-Saxon cultures will not happen in Italy. Just not happen at all. The whole issues of teachers being constantly anxious about their moral behavior is not something that's happened in Italy for the moment. So I tried to give a sense very often of how many of the things that are taken totally for granted actually become quite kind of bizarre and grotesque. For example, the wonderful tradition of the oral exam. Oral exams, obviously, a very efficient way of finding out if people know things and so on. And if you only had to perhaps examine, say, 10, 20 students or even 30, and if you didn't already know these students very well because you've done classes with them, and some of them you dislike and some of them you rather like, and often you like the ones who are not that smart, and you know, and so on and so forth, so that you're aware there's all kind of noise that you're having to deal with. But then very comically, sometimes you find yourself having to examine 250 students at an exam session. And then because it's considered very mean to fail people, and certainly there's no idea of a permanent failure, students can take their exams as many times as they want, signing in for them as many times as they want. There may be as many as 6 or 7 opportunities in a year to do an exam and fail it, or even to get a low grade and reject the low grade and do it again. And that then opens up the whole possibility of negotiating the grade with a professor who's so fed up of examining you because he's already examined you maybe 5 or 6 times. So it's a lot of fun to investigate these mechanisms, and the particular kind of students a particular kind of mentality that form around them, like the student who always has to get the top grade and will refuse anything but the top grade. And as a result, will maybe take 7 or 8 years to do his degree. That's not so common now, but it used to happen more in the past. And then I remember one particularly hilarious situation where we had a written exam followed by an oral exam. You had to pass the written exam to do the oral exam. And these two girls came together to take the exam. They always sat as near together as possible. And they must have taken this exam about 13 times over 2 years. And it was a written exam, so it was easy to fail them. And it was just a multiple choice in order to get to the next step. And they didn't copy because we checked, and they always just failed in their different ways. And then one time they both passed with quite good grades. And we were shocked. And I remember going to, when they came to the oral exam, I passed them in the corridor and I stopped and said, you know, this is wonderful that you passed, but I'm very curious that you both passed at the same time. And when we had checked and the answers were different. And they said, yeah, Professor, well, we studied this time. We thought we'd got an idea now of what the exam was like, and it was important to pass this time because now we need to get our degree. We always study together. There's a very charming thing, actually, that a lot of Italian students study together and so on. So I was just looking at this and all the various implications behind it, which are many, and a lot of fun to unravel. Enough. Sara. Another question. Let's look at other people's questions.
I wanted to, since we still have some time, I wanted to discuss a little bit, moving away from Italian life. I would like to discuss a little bit about your work in general, and your positioning in terms of writing, and especially in writing in Italian or writing in English. And actually, my question for you, which well, I'm going to read it so it's easier. So in one of her short stories collected in Altre Parole, Giunpa Lahiri writes, and I will quote the Italian translated from Anne Goldstein: writing in a different language means starting from zero. It comes from a void, and so every sentence seems to have emerged from nothingness. The effort of making the language mine, of possessing it, has a strong resemblance to a creative process, mysterious, illogical. I think that my new language, more limited, more immature, gives me a more extensive, more adult gaze. And my question is, what is the relationship? What is your relationship with writing in Italian? You've been living in Italy for a very long time, working in academia for a very long time. Have you ever considered adopting Italian as your narrative language? And why haven't you done it for Italian life? What did you gain from using English? What would you have lost with writing in Italian?
Okay, so it's obviously a big question. Let me say right away that I don't agree with the idea that you start from scratch when you write in a foreign language. You always start with the things you've already heard. It might be a much more limited range of things that you've already heard. But when I write in Italian, when I write articles in Italian, and I'm obviously hearing, you know, what I've heard in Italian. Obviously, and one of the curiosities of Lahiri's book is that she started writing in Italian when she really had a very minimal experience of living in Italy and being around Italian. Funnily enough, the only time I tried to write a novel in Italian, I did in my second year in Italy. I wrote a novel, a rather funny novel. I mean, it was a comedy called I Nani di Domani. I Nani di Domani. It was a kind of cross between a rock band and a terrorist group in Verona in the 1980s. And it was a little It was a little game, and it was fun. And years later, somebody who insisted that I show it to him saw it and sent it to a publisher who offered to publish it for me. And I looked at it again and thought, for heaven's sake, no, like reading it, I was just thinking this. The only thing that's charming about this book is my naivety about Italian, you know. So I didn't go that way. I became much more aware of my English because of being in Italy, because obviously anything that gives you an outside to your inside immediately changes it. And my English too began to be very much my English, because certainly the first 15 years in Italy, you know, obviously there were no mobile phones, there was no internet, there was no easy communication, there was no British or American television or satellites or anything. So I mean, I was really quite isolated to a degree. And that, I suppose, was interesting. It meant that I didn't adopt a lot of new English words that were coming up. A lot of words would come and go without me ever really having used them. So I liked that, and I began to like the fact that I was working in this language and making it my own. And quite honestly, there is an obvious power relationship between English and most other languages, and certainly Italian, such that if I write a book in English, you know, the advance I get is going to be 5 times more than the advance I get in Italy, and that is part of it. But also, most of all, I just feel part of a tradition that I grew up in of British and American literature, and I contribute to that and bring something into it from Italy. But I'm not anxious about it. It's not a problem for me not to write in Italian. It is interesting, though, when my books are translated into Italian, and particularly a book like Italian Life, that I'm very, very active in, you know, working with the translators to make it, not to impose myself on the translator, but if there are things in it that I just think take it away from what my Italian is and so on, then I'll sort of say, maybe we can move that. I hear it more like this. Okay. So, and funnily enough, this book in particular has been received in a very different way in Italy. And I think Italians have got this book much more than the British public did, which is interesting. I mean, whereas something like Italian Neighbours was obviously very much something that a British public would like. Something like this, I've had people write me very intense emails in response to this book, showing that, you know, they really got into it, or they were really disturbed by it. Some people really disturbed by it, and so on and so forth. So yeah, but it's a very difficult question why one writes in a particular language, and I think you need to have very particular issues to change language. I think Jhumpa Lahiri, I wrote an essay about Jhumpa Lahiri's book. I think she did have very particular issues related to her own background, which made sense for her to do what she did. I think her second book, written in Italian, is a much more successful book, and much more successful in the English, which she translated herself, and frankly largely rewrote herself. I thought it was much more successful. There are lots of questions here. Shall I check through them and answer them?
Yes. Yeah, we can. I actually had another question for you, but we can. No, I want to ask this question because it's really close to me, and I think close to a lot of people in here too. And that's a question of teaching. You've been, I mean, you're an author, an essayist, a translator, but you've been a teacher for many, many, many years. And I wanted to ask you what that experience meant to you, what role teaching played in your life. And I mean, I can feel it. I can feel the teacher coming out from the book. It's there, it's always there. And there are magnificent passages about your relationship with the students, your changing with the students. So yeah, what teaching means to you, what it meant to you.
It meant an enormous amount to me. I could get quite emotional about this, which is no doubt inappropriate, but I remember at the very beginning when I was simply teaching English to principianti, you know, at that time in particular, there was still, you could still get together a class of 150 people who'd never learned a word of English before. I found it terribly exciting to watch them making progress, and also particularly seeing as English was always seen as the instrument that might help them to escape for the ones who wanted to escape. Because I mean, in any society where belonging is a huge issue, there will be those who are entirely happy to belong, and there will be those who feel that they won't be able to be themselves until they've left. And English is often a key instrument, a key that will open the door. Later, when I started teaching in Milan, I got into a very strange situation, which it never ceased to amaze me, the job that they'd given me. I mean, I was translating already, and I thought, quite a good translator. But here I was running a degree course, postgraduate degree course on translation, for translation into Italian. I was teaching Sara to translate into Italian, which is completely crazy in a way, except that, you know, the only thing to do then is to teach the students to read English. And that was something I was particularly qualified, I thought, to do. But I like to think of myself as a reader as much as a writer. And so I was in a very vulnerable position in the classroom, because once I taught the students, you know, and invited them to really engage deeply with the English, then I was supposed to be judging their Italian versions. And okay, you know, it's not easy, not difficult to judge whether they've kind of got, you know, basically what the original was about. But it's very difficult for me to really feel the nuances of their versions and to sense the different parts of Italy they'd come from, and to sense over the years how the language was changing and certain words, for example, when I, in my early years teaching, you translated the English realize as rendersi conto. Now you teach it as realizzare, and you know, and there was the phase when I was saying, no, you can't do this, when, you know, the students saying, yeah, actually, you know, you do that. And they were right. And so what was interesting was that I was obliged, just as a sort of strategy, to say, kids, you know this stuff better than I do. So we're going to have to do this together with me knowing the English better than you do, and then talking about what you've done. And so it was just incredibly useful to me. It was useful for my Italian because I learned an enormous amount. And I think, you know, when going back to writing in Italian, one of the reasons I don't write in Italian is that I wouldn't be as good. I wouldn't have the same range of expression. As indeed Giunta Lahiri, you know, doesn't have the same range of expression in her Italian books. I mean, that doesn't mean that they can't be good, but it's different. So I can get quite moved thinking, particularly as the years went by. Let me read you a little bit that perhaps was the bit that that Sara was thinking of. Every year I would have to invigilate my written exam. So 3 hours of just watching 30 or 40 students writing. That was always quite a moving time, watching the intensity of the students as they struggled with the text that I had unkindly given them. And almost always, I don't know if you remember, Sara, but almost always the first appello would be in late May. There would almost always be a heat wave exactly at that moment, and before the university had turned on the air conditioning. So I remember one year, I don't know if it was your year, one year somebody fainted during the exam because it was just so hot and great big glass windows and 30 degrees outside. And anyway, just let me know, this is only a page. So over the next 3 hours, watching his 40 or so students bent over their work, it occurred to James that he loved his contact with them to the same degree that he hated having to deal with the head of faculty. He loved their naivety and shyness in the first lessons of their first year, when they sat in the front rows and worried whether they would ever catch their teacher's eye. And he loved their brashness and proprietorial airs in the last lessons of their last, when they sat 4 or 5 rows further back and barely gave him the time of day. They had so much to talk about to each other. He loved to watch how each year the individual youngsters who had survived the entrance exam gradually formed a group and became friends, or at least acquaintances, offering each other moral support at oral exams and thesis commissions. He loved the inevitable know-all of the class who tried to answer every question he asked, and the smart student who knew the answers but would not speak, and even the lost student who simply had no idea what the questions meant, let alone what the answers might be. They were all endearing in their ways, endearing as individuals, Costanza and Roberto and Maddalena, but also as roles and possibilities. Perhaps someone had to be the know-all and someone had to be lost. The class situation required it. He loved how, over the 2 years he taught them, 4 hours a week, month in, month out, the group would at first isolate and exclude the know-all, often quite cruelly, and then gradually reintegrate the culprit once they had suffered enough and lowered their crest. Year after year, class after class, these young people changed each other and became a community, and he, James, had been granted the immense pleasure of observing and savoring that process over and over. So he knew that midway through the first term, each class would already have its special feeling, perhaps of obedience, perhaps of rebellion, of intimacy or coolness, harmony or conflict. And he would be waiting for the feeling to emerge, ready to respond and adapt his teaching accordingly. And sometimes he found he had already adapted without realizing, discovering the mood of the class through his own changed behavior. Willy-nilly, one was part of the group oneself. I do think Italians have a very powerful ability to draw you into groups and into the feelings that go with groups. I'm not sure if it would have felt like this in the UK, maybe. I'm always amazed, Sara, at the way students will sacrifice crucial time in their own exam preparations to go and hold a friend's hand at their oral exam. Obviously, in the UK, where we didn't have oral exams.
It's a sense of community that really forms. I think even in small classes, you find groups. Not everyone like each other, but there is always a group of at least 4 or 5 people that are always there for each other. And you're right, you go to others people oral, you're there for them, and you really congratulate them if they get a good grade. You are with them if they fail. It's always been like that for me. That's something that I really see in Italy.
So one of the things I tried to do in the book was show how many Italian stories, and in fact this story, are stories that revolve around the question of being included or excluded in a group, whatever kind of group that might be, families or whatever. And that exclusion is really, the worst thing that can happen from Dante onwards, like the worst thing that can happen. And in fact, the book is about the key plot development of the book is when somebody, in order to punish one professor, that professor's student and younger colleague are excluded from, the doctorate program. Or so this is where the politicking, I don't know. I would like to believe that in the UK the politicking will be a little bit more direct, that you wouldn't take it out on a student in order to make the professor feel that they'd made a mistake and so on. So yeah, that what I try and do in the book is look at the good side and the bad side of these kind of dynamics and emotions.
We have some questions for the audience, from the audience. Maybe there's one from Arianna Dagnino. You can ask it yourself if you want, instead of me reading, since you're here.
Oh yeah, cultural appropriation.
You're mute. You're on mute.
Yes, sorry. Yes. So it's about the eternal question about cultural appropriation. So, which is, part of and parcel of what it means to be in academia today. And so, how do you feel about this whole issue of cultural appropriation when dealing with characters that don't belong to the writer's ethnic or cultural background you come from as a writer?
Yeah, let me say first that, this is obviously a debate that's raging in the Anglo-Saxon world to a much less degree in Italy. I mean, again, it was never my intention writing this book to sort of start a game of comparisons. But certainly, if I told if I went to the USA and then started to tell a series of narratives about dramatic things happening in an American universe, like one thinks of that extraordinary thing in California with the philosophy teacher who felt that he couldn't use the feminine pronoun where the student wanted it and asked if he could use the name instead, and then a whole issue developed, and then he lost his job, or there's a court case. None of this is remotely imaginable in Italy. However, to deal to issues of cultural appropriation, I think about this very little. Like I said, I've always been concerned if you look at my books on Italy over the years, the books about Italy have always, put me in the foreground, observing, which is like not appropriating anybody, but just saying, look, this is what I have observed. And even my third person novels, those rather bizarre noirs that I wrote, Cara Massimina and Mimi's Ghost and Painting Death, they also had an English figure at the center, and there was a certain caricature element but that caricature element was attributed to him and to his snobbishness, which was a fun way to be a bit of a snob myself, perhaps sometimes. So actually, this novel is the first one where I've genuinely and without any parodic desire, tried to get inside, or at least simply to narrate in intimate third person characters from a very different world from my own. But I've lived here 40 years, and I feel, these are people I've in one way or another lived beside. I think about this. I've written books in first person by a woman. and won prizes with them. I've spent all my life living with women. If it was a question of overhearing somebody, I've overheard, of ventriloquy, then it's women that I would be able to ventriloquize because that's been the voice in my ears the whole time. One never knows what's going on inside anybody else, whether it's your son. Sometimes your children seem the most alien people in the planet. Why there should be a huge difference inside one's own culture because of the color of skin, I'm not sure why that should be. I wrote a novel with a protagonist who's black, although he'd grown up been adopted in a white family. I did that on purpose, just so that I didn't have to appropriate a background I didn't know about. I worry about this very little. There's all kinds of ways that writers can be miserable opportunists and try to sell you something that's false. And this is one of them. On the other hand, there are writers who have genuinely, got close to other worlds and can talk about it well. I think it's wearisome to make this an issue. Utterly wearisome. I mean, it's a question of reading well, a question of reading and understanding if this is sensitive, intelligent writing. It's sad that we get into issues like this.
I totally agree. Thank you, Tim, for your answer.
Probably a bit long, sorry, but
not at all.
We had another question. I don't know if the person who asked is here, but she's asking that she said that she was very moved by your book, Teach Us to Sit Still, and has the writing of that book in any way informed the writing of subsequent books?
So, Teach Us to Sit Still, for those who don't know, was a book about chronic illness of a generally distasteful kind in the lower abdomen, and about overcoming that by great good fortune, eventually by learning breathing techniques and then meditation, which finally led me to go to things like Buddhist retreats and so on, like silent retreats for 10 days where you just sit and meditate for 10 days, which I still do when COVID is finally over. That will be one of the first things I will do. Has that affected my writing in any way? Everything affects your writing. Everything you do, living in Italy, growing old, being in good health, being in bad health. I think one thing that was important in that period was a sense of how important it is, if you want to live a reasonably long and not unhappy life, how important it is to deal with such issues as ambition and a proper sense of, how worried you should be about success and all that kind of thing. So meditating is a wonderful way of just sort of touching base and remembering that just breathing and being around is fine without too much self-regard. So I think since those days that I had that crisis, which was quite a major crisis, I think now when I write a book, I just take a lot more pleasure in making the book, in putting it together. And I always get a little anxious if I can't make things work, but less than in the past, hopefully. So, maybe that changed a bit. Maybe I become less pessimistic I had a few writers complaining that my most recent books were not sufficiently pessimistic. They had enjoyed the pessimism of books like Europa and Destiny. Somebody writes here, can you look ahead to Italy when the borders will reopen? Will the country and its spirit have truly and significantly changed in ways that you have perceived? Truly and significantly. Far be it from me to say that kind of thing. You know, I mean, this changes. I've been in Italy 40 years. Of course, it's changed. You know, technology's changed the way we live and all kinds of stuff. And of course, it hasn't changed at all. Some narratives are just going on exactly the same. At the beginning of this book, I recount Valeria's trip from Basilicata to Milan. And this is a trip that was recounted to me by a student from the south, not from Basilicata. And she said that when the train stopped in Naples, there was an aunt on the platform with a cup of coffee for her and some particular kind of cheese or something. And when the train stopped in Florence, there was another aunt on the platform with another confection of some kind. And when it stopped in Bologna, there was a nun aunt on the platform with another series of gifts. You know, it's very hard to imagine that kind of thing in the UK, and that's modern Italy. And you can immediately put a fable from Basile from the 17th century beside that, and you can see how it matches up. COVID won't change the country forever, but it's certainly made a lot of people a lot poorer, and I fear that as we move out of it, and you know, the government help, for what it's been worth, begins to fade, I feel we'll be looking at major unemployment, and let's just hope that the geniuses of producing money from nowhere have plans that will work on this regard. I don't think the country will have changed significantly at all. No. Nor do I really want it to, you know.
Do we have other questions from the audience? Either in the chat, or you can just speak up if you want.
Okay.
Well, there's one last question for you, Tim, that I wanted before leaving you sleep. So I've heard that you're publishing a new book and should be released in the summer. And the title is somewhat explicative: The Hero's Way, Walking with Garibaldi from Rome to Ravenna. And who write Italian life might perceive some echoes here. Do you want to tell us something about this new book?
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, you know, Italian Life is not an entirely happy book, is it? Italian Life is a book which says, you know, just how cruel, you know, people who read Italian Life will realize just how cruel the whole Italian way of doing things can be. Well, obviously every country can be cruel, but in this other book, we have a completely different feeling from beginning to end. So this other book is largely a book about Garibaldi, but also a book about walking. Now, Garibaldi is exactly the person who is missing in Italian life. You know, a brave, courageous, heroic, independent person. I remember at university, this is something I didn't put in Italian Life. At university, at one point, we decided to, when I say we, I mean me and a fellow conspirator, invited our colleagues to sign a petition to get back the rights to vote for the head of faculty, which had been removed from us. The head of faculty had been permanently taken away from the democratic voting of the faculty. And we tried to get people to sign a petition to ask the rector to give us those back. And almost everybody replied, I will only sign this petition if I'm sure that the rector has already decided and that we win. Okay. Which of course is not, the whole point of signing petitions is that the other guy doesn't want to do it, but you show that collectively we're all together on this. So Garibaldi was exactly the kind of person who would have signed the petition and in fact led the petition and a cavalry charger. So I've been fascinated by Garibaldi and by Garibaldi's particular position in Italian mythology and in the whole spirit of it belonging in Italy. He occupies a very special space. And one of the most moving and curious moments in Garibaldi's career was when, after the 1948-49 revolutions, which brought about the Republic in Rome, the brief Republic in Rome, where Garibaldi, together with Mazzini and others, defended the city against a French siege for some months, quite nobly and heroically. And then inevitably the huge French army with lots of artillery finally won. But Garibaldi didn't want to surrender. And in the night, he took 4,000 men out of Rome. And he wanted to go out into the countryside and start a guerrilla warfare. And failing that, to try to reach the Venetian Republic, which was still holding out in 1914, the summer of 1949, against the Austrians. So this resulted in a walk or a march with 4,000 men zigzagging across Lazio and Umbria, and then Tuscany, and then across the Apennines into the Marche, San Marino, down to the Adriatic coast at Cesenatico. Garibaldi had his wife, Anita, beside him, who was pregnant, 6 months pregnant. And more than half of his 4,000 men deserted during the trip. Fortunately, there are 2 or 3 excellent and fascinating diaries of the march. And in the summer, just before COVID, in 2019, I and Eleonora, my lady, we walked in the same month as he did, in July. So it was a hot July. I don't know if you remember 2019, it was like 38 degrees or 36 degrees most days. And we walked 630 kilometers, I think it's 400 something miles, in exactly the same times that they did, trying as far as possible to follow the same route. And then afterwards, writing, Italy then, Italy now, the Austrian Empire then, the European community now, differences, similarities, and just on the one hand, a travelogue, on the other hand, a reflection on Italy, and then just fabulous details about how these men were living and how they were sleeping and where they were sleeping, and the relationship with the church, which was fraught, obviously, and the relationship with the middle classes and between the patriots and the middle classes and so on and so forth. It was an incredibly rich, fascinating, fun book to write. Lots of landscape writing, lots of fantastic dialogues with people. So there you go. Yeah, it's just a hugely different book from Italian life, full of fun as well and full of color.
Well,
I've got the cover here. I've got the cover.
We can't wait to.
There you go.
Can't wait to read it.
Yeah, The Hero's Way. It's called. It's coming out. It's coming out in summer, so it'll be out in the States as well in summer.
Perfect. So well, it's quite late. So if there are no other questions, Tim, if if you want to add final notes, or I mean, you
No, I just want to say thank you to those who've hung on throughout, you know, and it's midnight 30 here, so I feel rather odd because I'm usually in bed at 11 o'clock. I'm actually dying for a glass of wine, which I'm going to grab as soon as Sara lets me go. So,
so I guess
thank you, everybody. No, thanks a lot.
Well, we thank you. We thank you for your words, for reading from your book, and for the incredibly interesting conversation that we had. So thank you. I guess just
everybody.
A virtual again, a virtual clap for you.
Bye everybody. Bye.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Grazie, team.
Thanks, guys. Thanks.
Ciao.